So this morning, we get to look at money. I feel like I've said that to you at least once in this series already, because Solomon tends to have a little bit of repetition throughout some of these chapters, and some things just kind of overlap a little bit. And so there may be certain things that pop into your head when you hear the word money, and it might just be what it looks like. There are songs that pop into my head when I think about money. It's like, it took me a while to find it. I was just like, I had to listen to it as I was preparing. It's like, money, 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 money. I was like, hey, there it is. Started jamming a little bit. But that kind of thing, it just brought those thoughts to my head, and this morning is what we're going to talk about. Our world, our American culture is obsessed with it. Everyone's chasing it. We're among the richest nations in the world, and to be honest, money is probably not really far from any of our minds ever. Whether it's, hey, how are we going to pay this bill? Or maybe it's the idea that grocery prices just keep on rising all the time. Or gas prices, for that matter, right now, that have been going up. Right? Money plays a role in everything that we do. We think through those things. We think about the cost of those things escalating, the cost of living that keeps rising, and yet my pay doesn't keep rising along with it. So how are we going to deal with those things? And money tends to be on our minds. We sing about it, like I just did. Or songs like, if I had $1 million, right? Like, what would I do if I had $1 million? It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever will, so I'm not even going to think about it. We watch game shows where people can win large sums of money. Right? We know the importance of money, and yet American culture puts it on a pedestal. It puts it on a pedestal. In fact, there's a philosophy out there that's best summarized by a 3-letter abbreviation, and I'm curious if any of you know. And so when I give you the abbreviation, if any of you know what it means, feel free to say it, all right? The abbreviation is MOE. Does anybody know what that stands for? You can probably guess the M is money, all right? The abbreviation is money over everything. That MOE stands for money over everything. And that's the way that a lot of folks in our society and in our culture live. They live by that motto. That's the priority. How can I make the next dollar? What kind of side hustles can I have to try to get more money? What can I do to work my way to the top? It doesn't matter how we get there, we just want it. They prioritize it over everything. And this morning, we're going to take a look at what Solomon has to say. And the main idea this morning that I want to summarize for us is very simple. And you've probably learned that about me. I'm a pretty simple person. So here we are with that. And the main idea this morning is simply this, that wealth never satisfies our heart, but Christ does. It's the main idea this morning. That wealth never satisfies our heart, but Christ does. See, we always think of money in light of its benefits and what it can do for us. If I only made X amount of money, then I could afford this, or then I could buy this, or I could do this thing. And yet, I tend to agree with an old hip-hop artist, the late Notorious B.I.G., mo money, mo problems. Tends to be more accurate. We always think about it for its benefits. We don't think about it for the problems that money brings with it, which can very easily be seen. As a matter of fact, Solomon hits that. He reveals some of these problems with us this morning, as well as several right responses to money and to wealth. And so we're obviously looking at a large section of Scripture this morning. So I could have easily just texted Chris and said, we're going to have to make this multiple weeks. But I didn't. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do my best to be clear, concise, and to the point. Okay? Because we are covering basically a chapter and a half. So I'm going to do my best to do that. And so here's what we're going to cover this morning. We're going to look at 6 responses to wealth that reveal our this morning. 6 responses to wealth that reveal our heart, because the way that we respond to it does just that. It shows much about who we are, how we believe, and what our heart cherishes. And so the first one that we're going to look at is poor treatment of others. That's our first two verses. You'll also notice this morning that typically after a point, I'll read those verses. I'm gonna not read them each time this morning, and so feel free to take a look in your Bibles. But poor treatment of others is the first one. The second one is the love of money, or maybe the overlove of money, maybe a better way to put it. The third one is the mismanagement of money. You have it, but you use it poorly. The mismanagement of money. The fourth is the... You thought I was going 3 since it's so big. We got 6 points this morning, all right? That's why I said I'm going to be clear, concise, to the point. To the 6th point, that is. Acknowledging the giver. Discontentment with wealth is the 5th one. Discontentment with wealth. And then the last one is God-honoring conduct, all right? God-honoring conduct. I'm going to do my best to work through these and to be faithful to God's word this morning. And so the first one we're going to look at is the poor treatment of others. And we read about this in the first 2 verses, verse 8 and verse 9. And I find it interesting that Solomon opens the section of wealth by talking about oppression of the poor. It's kind of interesting, but in order to have poor, you also have to have the rich, right? There has to be one to have the other. And so it seems a little out of place until you consider what it means. See, it doesn't mean the way that American culture uses the word oppressed today. American culture uses the word oppressed in some ways like, well, you're oppressing these people because you disagree with them, or because you've told somebody they're wrong about something, or oppressing them. That's not the way that the term is used here, and that's not the way that the term truly means. The term translated oppression really is talking about treating someone cruelly, right, or with cruelty. And I would submit that this happens often either for personal gain or personal pride, somebody that has maybe an I'm better than you mindset. And so he's talking about oppression here, about being treated cruelly and with cruelty. And so Solomon says, don't be amazed when you see the oppression of the poor. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? He's like, don't be surprised by it. It's going to happen. Don't be surprised. Not only don't be surprised, but he says the oppression happens not because of one person, but because of a system. Because from the top down, they all have one thing in mind. Because if you notice, it says it's not him. He's got this person above him. There's this person above him. And all of them want a cut. See, greed isn't just something individuals deal with personally. We see it with the government. We see it with leadership across the nation. Not just our nation, but across the world. See, the ones with power all have the same thing in mind. Profit, money. It's a mindset. They're all about the Benjamins as well. And when the money is the end game, the ones with the most of it feel they can treat others poorly or unfairly for their own benefit. As I studied, I was reminded of a line from the Disney movie Aladdin. There's a scene where Jafar is in disguise and he's in jail and he's talking to Aladdin, and he says this. He says, "You've heard of the golden rule, haven't you? The one who has the gold makes the rules." That line just stuck with me as I was trying to prepare for this, because I think that is an accurate idea, right? That money is connected with power, that whoever has that power, whoever has that authority, or in his case, whoever has the gold makes the rules. If you have the money, then you have the authority to do what you want. See, the high official mentioned in verse 8 has someone above him waiting for his cut. And then there's someone above him waiting for his cut of the money. See, the system here is corrupt and it's weak, and the weak are the ones who suffer. So the land is for gain as well because it's taxed. And so when it talks about that land, they're making money off of that because it's taxed land. And yet their greed, their desire for money comes at the expense of and at the impact, makes an impact on others. See, the greed says that nothing's going to stop me from making this money, that I'll mow people down if I have to in order to get it. If it takes treating the poor unjustly for me to get what I want, then that's what I'm going to do. See, greed harms other people. It's sinful to obtain our wealth in an unjust way. It's also sinful to use the position that comes with that wealth to treat people poorly. And that's exactly what he's speaking out against here. See, this addiction for money, for power, it doesn't care who it hurts along the way. It has no mind to that. And Solomon says, don't be surprised when you see this. In other words, it's going to be something that exists in the world. The rich and the powerful, they're going to oppress the poor to further their financial gain. That's what they're going to do. With that said, notice he said, don't be surprised by it. He didn't say, be okay with it and do nothing about it. Notice there's a difference. Don't be surprised by it. Doesn't mean ignore it. It doesn't mean don't do anything about it. It doesn't mean be comfortable with it. Let's not get confused by that. Proverbs 14, verse 31 tells us otherwise. Whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him. See, oppression of the poor is insulting to God. We're treating his creation, his image bearers, as less than human. So we can't let the amount of money that someone has allow us to treat them in a negative fashion. Whether they're poor or rich is not what's most important about who someone is. It's the fact that God created them in his image and he loves them. So as Proverbs says, we honor people when we help those in need. It's honoring to God when we help those in need. So he calls out oppression, and treating others poorly for your own personal gain is a response to wealth and money. And what that does is it reveals a prideful heart. It reveals a heart that fails to see others as the image bearers that they are. And that's dangerous. And so that's the first point that Solomon makes, that money can lead to poor treatment of others. And then he moves into the love of money, and that's our second one this morning. He moves into the love of money, which is verses 10 through 12. And verse 10 starts off by saying, he who loves money will not be satisfied with it. And so what does it mean to love money? What does it mean to love money? Well, in all honesty, the root word that's used here means either to like it or to flirt with it, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so it's something that you continue to pursue, right? You love it. He's basically saying that you find it more enjoyable than anything else. That's basically what he's saying. So when you have this love of money, you're finding it to be the most important thing, to put it above everything else, that it's most enjoyable. And Solomon says it's never going to satisfy you. He offers a couple of side effects or byproducts, if you will, of pursuing money over everything. That as you accumulate more money, all of a sudden, you've got more mouths to feed. I don't know if you caught that in the passage, in those verses 10 through 12. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. What advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? And so people become like leeches. I think if you talk to any famous person, I don't know if you know any famous people, I don't know any to talk to them, but if I did, you'd probably find out that all of a sudden, once they became famous and they gained more money, all of a sudden they had a lot more friends that they didn't have before, that were usually coming at them for money. Like, what can you give me? What can I get from you? That's a byproduct of that, of loving money so much. You're going to have more people that are going to come after you and try to get your money, and it's a cycle. Because then when that happens, then you have to pursue even more money. Because you can't do for all those people what they're asking of you. And it's a cycle that continues on. And then he brings up the idea of rest. He says, the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. In other words, he's going to be full physically because he can afford the food to fill his stomach. But thinking about money and worrying about money is dominating his mind. And it's dominating his mind to the extent he can't sleep. It's consuming his thoughts. Maybe that's not money for you. Maybe you have other things that consume your thoughts that prevent you from getting the rest that you need. Because you and I both know that when we have something heavy that's weighing on our minds, it's hard to sleep because we can't stop thinking about it. We know that. That's a truth that most of us have experienced. When there's something heavy on our minds, it makes it really difficult when you're trying to sleep to get it out of your mind and to go to sleep. And that's what he's saying here about money, because you're thinking about, well, how am I is there something that could happen that could make me lose it? What can I do to make more of it? Who is it that I have to pay? All of these types of things that just continue to flood the mind because we're worried about the bad things that could happen. And that's one of the byproducts of pursuing wealth. In Psalm 127, verse 2, it says, "It is vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. It's vain, using that same language that we read about all throughout Ecclesiastes of something being done in vain and vanity. It says it's vain. Instead, what you're experiencing is anxious toil, and it's preventing you from sleep. But those who are my beloved, those who are loving me above money, are going to get that rest that they need because they're satisfied in Him. See, those that love money more experience anxious toil and a lack of rest. There's an old saying, an old proverb, not from the book of Proverbs, by the way, but an old proverb that goes like this: money is like seawater. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. Like seawater. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. It's a craving that can never be satisfied. What begins as, I need money to pay my bills, turns into, I need this money to buy the most updated things. I need this money to uphold my appearance in front of others. I need this money in order to keep feeding my habit or my addiction or whatever it is that I enjoy buying or collecting, whatever is going on. Maybe it's shoes or it's cars or it's something else. We keep feeding it. It starts off as something really small and it grows and explodes. Because once you taste wealth, all it does is leave you wanting more. In other words, it's not all it's cracked up to be. It's not all it's cracked up to be. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10. You should probably assume I was going to go here, for those of you that know the passage. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. So from the love of money springs all kinds of evil. Money can draw us away from the Lord when we allow it to take His place on the throne. When we worship it, when it becomes our idol. Then it pulls us away. See, we hope that money provides us that something it was never intended to provide us. See, money is intended to provide for our basic needs, for your food and your shelter, not to be all-consuming, not to meet our need for satisfaction. We don't have money to try to meet our need for love or to meet our need for fulfillment or to meet our need for peace or for comfort or any of these things. That's not the intent for what money exists for. We can't use it to seek out our need for purpose and meaning. We won't find it there. I want to take a moment and consider Judas. Right? Judas loved money. He loved it. There was people that assumed, not that it was necessarily in the Scriptures, that he took money often as being a money keeper there. And yet Judas thought that the money that he would get paid for turning in Jesus would satisfy him. He had a price. Whatever they paid, he said that was going to be enough. And you know what happened after Jesus was arrested, right? Judas returned the money. Not only did he return it, he threw it back at them. Because he realized what he had done, and then what did he do? He took his own life. See, Judas came to a conclusion that many of us may have already come to, that the love of money doesn't satisfy and that it only leads to evil. We know that money is necessary for life in a lot of ways, but money and wealth don't exist for the purpose of your satisfaction. When we love it, when we pursue it to satisfy us, what happens when we run out of it? If that's where your satisfaction lies, what happens when you don't have it anymore? What happens when others have more than you do? If that's where you're finding your purpose and your meaning, at that point we cease to be satisfied. The good news is we were never meant to be satisfied by our wealth to begin with. But we can be satisfied in Jesus because He's all that we ever need. We need to love Him the most. And so what the love of money does is it reveals an idol in our heart. It reveals an idol that needs to be addressed because the love of money leads to all sorts of problems. But the mismanagement of money carries problems of its own, and that's our next point this morning is the mismanagement of money. The mismanagement of money, and that's verses 13 through 17. Verses 13 through 17. In verse 13 and 14, we see two opposite ends of the spectrum. At first it says that he keeps all of his money. right? So you imagine somebody hoarding everything that they have, not using it for anything purposeful, just keeping it and accumulating it, and then it says, and he lost it in a bad venture. You see both ends of the spectrum. First is just hoarding it and keeping it and accumulating it, and the other is blowing it all. So this man mismanaged his money, and as a result, he has nothing left. See, the more money that you have, the more opportunity you have to mismanagement and to use it poorly. I think that's a fair assessment. Many of us in the room can probably look back at some financial decision that we made over the course of our life and say, I wish I would have done that differently. I think we've been there. I wished I wouldn't have spent that money on that because there was a better use for it. Or whatever the case. Maybe something happened after the fact and it was like, oh my goodness, why did I do that? It happens. It's easy to do in our day and age. And in many ways, the desire for more money, the love of money, leads people to take risks with their money that others wouldn't normally take. As a matter of fact, we don't have to go very far to find a casino to gamble. There's 2 within, 5 miles or so of here? Don't have to go far. The state has legalized sports gambling and betting, so someone can do that simply from their phone. You don't have to go anywhere to take those risks. And why do people do those things? Most of the time, it's with the hope to do what? They want to win because they want to gain more money. But the risk is real, and it can often lead to losing it all. So I want to say something that's a struggle in the room, being risky in those types of ways, gambling or sports betting or things like that. You could better not be, I can do it because it's legal. That can't be your logic. Because being legal by the state or the country doesn't make something wise. Those are 2 different things. Something being legal versus something being wise are 2 way different things. 1 Corinthians 6:12 wants to inject into this conversation right here. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. See, whether something is legal shouldn't determine whether we do it. Smoking is legal, vaping is legal, weed is legal in our state. That doesn't mean that we should do it. We have to consider whether something is helpful and whether something is dominating us or not. And I think that's the key here with this owner mismanaging his money. He let his money control him instead of him demonstrating control over his money. That's not the way God intended us to steward or manage our money. It harmed him. Not only did it harm him, it hurt his relationship with his son. It hurt the legacy that he was trying to leave behind because he had nothing to offer to his son. And so just as he came into the world with nothing, he leaves with nothing. And so he can't keep his wealth, but also he had nothing to leave for his son because of his own money failures. And look how it leaves him in verse 17. Look how it leaves him. All his days he eats in darkness, and much vexation and sickness and anger. Vexation is frustration, or the term for frustration. So this is how he is. He's miserable. It leaves him absolutely miserable. He's by himself. And his soul is full of frustration and anger. On the other side, if he had spent his money wisely, he would have had something to leave for his son. He wouldn't be lonely as he would have others enjoying a meal with him. But mismanaging our money is dangerous and has far-reaching ramifications. And this passage shows that. As a matter of fact, Solomon tells us that this missed the mark with the purpose of money. But he then proceeds to tell us what's good, which leads us to our next point. So he kind of mixes this in. We've seen some negatives, and now he's like, hey, however, we're going to acknowledge the source. That's where we're at now. And our 4th one here in verses 18 through 20, this closes out chapter 5 before we move on to chapter 6. And so Solomon kind of deviates away from the negative to a positive thought. And this is what is good and fitting, he says, to eat and drink and find enjoyment in your toil. Notice, he doesn't say to find enjoyment in your wealth. You notice the term that he uses, he says in your toil, not in your wealth. Rather, your wealth comes from your hard work, and it meets your needs, such as your food and your drink. And then he moves forward. Your wealth doesn't even come from you. Your hard work enables you to have what you need, but you only have wealth because God gave it to you. You only have it because God gave it to you. That's in verse 18. Verse 19. Everyone also, God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them. It's a gift. Remember Jesus' words in Matthew 7, verse 11, he reminds us that God the Father gives better gifts than we can ever imagine. This is one of those. Anything that you have, any wealth, any possessions, anything that you have is not because you're amazing. It's because God gave it to you. The things that we have are His, and they need to be stewarded that way. See, God's the ultimate gift giver. Maybe you've been in a situation where you know someone else is going to get you a really good gift, and you're trying to play topper and try to do something even better than what they give you. This is never going to work in this case. You're not going to outgift the Lord. There's nothing you can offer. We won't win that competition. And yet, while God is the giver of wealth, there's an interesting piece of the puzzle here. You notice he mentions wealth and possessions, but did you catch the next phrase? Power to enjoy them is part of the gift. That's interesting. That's given by God, the ability to enjoy what you have. See, you and I can only enjoy our wealth and our possessions if God gives us the ability to. And that ability comes not from placing wealth in a high position, but from placing God in the right place, on His throne, where He belongs. And so what does it reveal about the heart? Well, when we treat riches as gifts from God, our hearts are filled with joy. And that's how verse 20 ends. When we treat what we have as gifts from God, our hearts are filled with joy. And not joy because of the things, but joy because of the one who gave them to us. It reveals that our joy is found in God and not our wealth. But Solomon is not done. We've got two more things to cover. The next one is discontentment with wealth. That's the first 6 verses of chapter 6. Discontentment with wealth. See, Solomon sees another evil. Now notice verse 2. It connects back to chapter 5, verse 19. He uses the same language in both of those, so you might want to take a look at that later on. In verse 19 of chapter 5, God speaks of giving wealth and possessions and power. And here it's a bit different. In chapter 6, verse 2, it says God gives wealth, possessions, and yet God does not give him power to enjoy them. But a stranger enjoys them. See, God's given this man wealth and possessions and honor, and He's given him everything he could possibly need in this life. We read the same thing in 2 Chronicles chapter 1 about Solomon. When he asks for wisdom, God says He's also going to give him wealth and possessions and honor. See, this man has no physical need that's unmet. He can have anything and everything that he wants, and yet he doesn't have the ability to enjoy them. In other words, God hasn't allowed him to enjoy these things because of his discontentment. Because he's not satisfied with them. But it's not just about money. He talks about other forms of wealth here in these verses. It's not just about money. He says, Solomon says, what if you had 100 children? First off, that's a crazy large amount of children. All right? But what if you had 100 children? Because he's talking about, right, what you leave, your legacy, having heirs to your household, your name, all of these things. What if you had 100 children? Because children are looked at as a blessing. Then he would have a wealth of a heritage that he could pass down. And then, but what if you lived many years? What if you had a wealth of life in the number of years that you lived? What if you had not just money and possessions, but you had a massive family with a lot of children, and then you also lived a very long life? What about that? Then you should be satisfied, right? Money? Got it. Large family and heritage? Got it. Long life? Got it. He doesn't need anything. He has it all. And yet, hear what Solomon says. You have that, but it's not enough for you. You're unsatisfied. For you, Here's what Solomon says, "For you, I say, a stillborn child is better off than you." Think about that. That is an incredibly strong statement coming from Solomon. Incredibly strong statement. A stillborn child is better off than you are. He says it's better to be a child that was born without life than to live the way you're living. So why compare him to a stillborn child? See, a stillborn child hasn't seen the sun or known anything, as the verse says. He finds rest. But this child never got to experience a friendship, never got to experience the joys of the world, never got to experience money, to experience the fruit of his labor, the satisfaction of his hard work, or to experience the taste of ice cream. Never got to experience anything good in the world. And yet he says, it's better to be him than what you are. And here's the point. A child that never got to experience the good things in life is better off than the one who experienced the good God had to offer and was never satisfied with it. Better to not have experienced it at all than to experience it and been unsatisfied. That's what he's saying here. Dwell on that for a minute. Right? It's one thing to say, I wish I was never born when things are going tough. It's one thing to say something like that. As a matter of fact, we have people in the Scriptures that did that. As a matter of fact, Job does this in Job chapter 3, verse 16. Why was I not as a hidden stillborn child? Were Job's words. So Job's going through it at this point. And so he makes this same statement, but he's talking about having nothing because everything's been taken from him. He's in the midst of struggle and despair. And so he's lost it all. This man has it all. He has great riches, and Solomon says, you're better off as a stillborn because you're never satisfied. There's a quote that I came across this week, and here's what it says. It says, it's not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that's poor. It's not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. I would submit that Scripture confirms that message. Even though we've discussed this passage throughout our series in Ecclesiastes, I want to remind us what 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 says. It says, godliness with contentment is great gain. Godliness with contentment is great gain. That's our aim right there. What the Scriptures say here is contrary to a worldly point of view, contrary to a philosophy that prioritizes money over everything. That philosophy would say that getting more money is what produces gain. I gain more money, then I can gain more things. I can gain more honor. That's what they would look at as gain, but that's not what Paul says. He says, no, pursuing godliness coupled with being content with what you have is great gain. That's a different message than the message that's all around us every day. It's a different one altogether. If you want more of something, want more of Jesus. If you want to know Him more. See, it's through Jesus that we've gained something we could never gain on our own. We've gained eternal life. We've gained forgiveness. We've gained justification. We've gained righteousness because of Jesus. So if you want something more, want Jesus more. One of my wife's favorite verses is John 3:30. It says, He must increase, but I must decrease. See, if we need more of anything, we need more of Jesus and less of us. The one who loves wealth and pursues it for meaning and purpose will never be satisfied. But the one who pursues Christ will find everything that they need. And so pursuing money is going to leave you discontent. It's going to leave you wanting more. And this discontentment with money reveals a discontentment in our heart for the giver of that wealth. It's not just being discontent with money, you're also discontent with God. That's what it reveals. That God's not enough. And that's a dangerous revelation about the heart if you find yourself in a place where you can say, God's not enough, I have to have this too. It's a bad spot to be in. We've seen a lot. We've seen the treatment of the poor, the love of money, the mismanagement of that money, discontentment, and they've revealed things about our heart. And now Solomon pivots yet again, and we say there is a proper way to conduct oneself when money is present or not. And that's our final point, is God-honoring conduct is a response to wealth. That's an option. God-honoring conduct in verses 7 through 9 of chapter 6. And so Solomon sheds some light on the character of the rich and the poor in these verses. See, money has the ability to influence our conduct greatly. I don't know if you realize that or not. What you do, how you act, those things can be influenced by money very easily. People will do a lot of stupid things for money that they wouldn't do for free. You know what I'm saying? Money influences behavior. Money influences conduct. And we know that both the rich and the poor, according to our passage, according to just common sense, they have the same needs. The rich and the poor have the same needs. They both need fed. They both need clothed. They both need shelter of some sort. And so here's what he says. You toil for your mouth. In other words, you toil for food so that your belly is full. And yet, what does it say about someone to be full? To have what they need and not be satisfied with that. See, the one who seeks after riches has an appetite that isn't satisfied. And Solomon asks, what advantage does the wise man have over the fool? And I think it's a great question, and I honestly think it's going to be answered a bit more in chapter 7, because if you look ahead, chapter 7 is comparing wisdom and folly. Okay, and so we'll get there next week, and I think that's going to answer that question a little bit more. But the advantage of the wise, what makes one wise, is recognizing God as the source of their wealth and honoring Him with it. That's what makes them wise. The foolish person, no matter how much he has, is going to seek personal fulfillment and gain, and he's going to take the credit for himself. Now, what about the poor? We started off our passage talking about the poor, the oppression of the poor, and then he comes back to the poor here at the end of the passage, and he talks about them as well. The poor man conducts himself well before others, is what it says. That's interesting. In other words, what it's saying is, because of his conduct and the way that he presents himself before other people, he actually has more than the one that has a loaded bank account. He's got more. Well, what does he have? See, while he has less physical wealth, he can walk around with his head high because he's earned his money honestly. He's got a good work ethic. He has the respect of his neighbors. He has the comfort of this life where his needs are met. He's content with what he's been given, which eliminates that anxiety over what he doesn't have. And God sees him, and He's pleased. See, they've learned to be content, and to be content in the Lord. And so it's better to stay focused on what God's given us than to concern ourselves with what we don't have. When we do that, when we focus on what others have that we don't, Solomon calls it vanity, just like he calls a lot of other things vanity. And so we've looked at these responses this morning to money and wealth. And Solomon has one more thing to say this morning. He closes out the first half of Ecclesiastes with what I believe is a summary kind of a statement. Okay, so there's 12 chapters. This is the end of the first half of the book of Ecclesiastes. You notice actually chapter 7 almost reads more like the book of Proverbs does when you get to chapter 7. It's written a little bit more like that. It starts to read a little bit more like that. So he's kind of transitioning here from talking about everything being vanity to speaking about some other things. And so he kind of closes out this half of the book after talking about pleasure and toil and religious rituals and time and wise living and wealth. He closes with a statement and a question. See, first he says, you're not able to dispute with one stronger than you. In other words, I don't know if you ever tried to fight a battle with somebody that was way stronger than you. Probably wasn't your greatest choice. And here's what he's saying. You're not going to be able to convince God, no matter how hard you try, that money or any of these other vanities are of most importance. You can't do it. You're not going to be able to convince God of that. You won't win a debate with God and convince Him of what holds the most worth and value. And then he asks, who knows what's good for man while he lives under the sun? lives the few days of his life, who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? There's only one answer to that question. There's only one answer to that question. God is the answer to that question. God's stronger than you and me. He's the one who knows what is good for you and for me in this life. And in fact, as we studied, we've read multiple times that God is the one who gives us good things in this life because he knows what we need. In Psalm chapter 107, verse 9, our author says, "For he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things." God gives good things. He satisfies the soul because each one of us has a longing in our soul for something. You've heard it said that our hearts have a God-shaped hole and that we always try to fill it with other things and it never works. And the reason why is because our hearts were created to find rest, enjoyment, peace, fulfillment in Him and not in other things. And so when we confess with our mouths that Jesus is Lord, and we believe in our hearts that God's raised Him from the dead, His Word says that we'll be saved, that's where we're going to find our fulfillment. It's through that relationship with Him. And so whatever wealth or possessions we have been given to us by God for His purposes. And so if you find yourself being enthralled this morning with the idea of money, or you notice that your pursuit of money for selfish gain has taken control over your life and your heart, that all you do is think about it all day, every day, that you continue to mismanage the things that God has given you, take it to Him. Go before Him. Ask Him for help. Ask Him for forgiveness. Lay it at His feet. Because He tells us that if you repent and ask forgiveness, that He's faithful to forgive. That's the God that we serve. And that's the God that we're going to find satisfaction in. Let's pray together.